For those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Christopher Lindsay, an Edison player from Windsor, Ontario, Canada, and it is my goal to win my first ever Ultimate Time Wizard title. With this being my third Ultimate Time Wizard event, having managed top 8 at both YCS Indy in 2023 and the most recent NAWCQ in Austin, Texas, I'm going to be preparing for this event like never before. Every Friday up until the event, I will be posting a new episode showing my preparations for this event, including testing meta decks, discussing pros and cons of playing them, side deck patterns, and more as I try and decide what deck I'm going to bring, as well as how I'm going to best tackle the meta. Over the next 5 weeks, I will be putting aside all of my other hobbies, especially retro gaming, and put all of my effort into testing and preparing for the event in the hopes of breaking through the top 8 barrier and winning not only my first event, but the first ever Canadian Ultimate Time Wizard title. This is my road to YCS Niagara Falls. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome to episode 2 of winning a YCS Road to Niagara Falls. In this episode, we are exploring the efforts I put in this week to learning the Vayu Turbo deck. This includes deck building, testing, looking at different matchups, and pretty much going over the side deck and seeing whether or not the playstyle of the deck is something I would consider bringing to a major event, specifically YCS Niagara Falls. So in this video, I'm going to start by going over the deck list, and this is how all these episodes are going to go when it comes to reviewing different decks that I'm considering for the event. But we're going to review the deck list that I played this week, talk about some of the matchups, some of the stuff that I played against that I liked or didn't like, and then I'm just going to play just some footage of me on Dueling Book, playing the deck, playing different matchups, and I'm just going to talk about my experiences playing it and kind of debate whether I would consider bringing this to a major in the future, and then specifically, do I think I have enough time to prepare and play it for YCS Niagara? So without further ado, let's get into the deck profile. So before we get into the deck profile, I just wanted to quickly shout out Playtest IRL. This video here, the list that I played is heavily inspired. It's almost identical to this one with like 1 or 2 cards changed out. So shout out to this guy, Ernie. I don't know his full name or anything, but this is his list. I know he's had some success with Vayu in the past. So I just wanted to shout him out before I get into the list, since it is not my... it's not my creation. This is something I net decked, and for the sake of this series, like I'm going to start with a template of a deck list that showed success, and then if I do decide I do want to play it, that's when I will start looking into ratios and different things. But this is the list. It seems like it's a pretty standard Vayu list. That's the one thing about Vayu that I would say it's not a bad thing, because good decks are good for a reason, but I do like decks with some creativity to them. Decks that don't really have like a streamlined deck list or like a very established set of like 35 cards that you kind of have to play. So in this list, yeah, we got triple Vayu, triple Sorako, 2 of each of the Warriors, Grepher and Armageddon Knight, 2 Caius, Chaos Sorc. I love Chaos Sorcerer, so obviously I'm happy it's in here. Dark Arm Dragon, play the Gores, play Plague and Necrogardna. Play the Gale, which I do love. I've just grown so in love with this card over the last like couple of months playing it in Amaryllis. I think it's just a wonderful card to have in almost any Edison deck. But 1 Hamster, triple Raikou, and then I opted to play the Charge. I've seen some lists that side deck Charge. I could never side deck this card. I feel like you kind of just have to play it. It's just such a powerful card. I understand if you want to play 2 Hamster, but I mean, Charge is just so good. So I wanted a version of the deck that played it in the main deck. Then for the final monster, obviously the Card Trooper. Spells, spell lineup, like I said, it's very standardized. These are like the 7 spells, 6 if you don't include the Charge, that almost any list is playing. And then 10 traps with the main deck dev and 1 main deck oppression. I think that the main deck oppression, the main deck dev are like the thing that would draw me to Vayu the most, being able to play such powerful cards that typically are not... They're not like, you can't play them in every deck, every list. Like for example, I play Amaryllis, can't play either of these cards in them really. So being able to play them along with like cards like Dark Arm Dragon, Chaos Sorcerer, and then obviously like the Vayu package is just very strong. It's cards like that return as well that kind of would draw me to a deck like this. The one thing about this deck is that the play style is something that I don't necessarily know if it is for me, but we'll get into that a bit later. Side deck, pretty simple. Being able to play Fossil Dino is really, really good. I think this card is just fantastic in the side deck. So being able to play it, like this deck justifies it pretty well, but yeah, Fossil Dino is really good. Dust Tornado is obviously just a fantastic card. Pulling the Rugs for Frogs. Latent Imprisoning for Lightsworns is something I kind of want to adopt into my Amaryllis builds, just because Lightsworn is, well, not just Lightsworn, but Gristia Swarm as well. It can be a pretty tough matchup, so being able to play a blowout like this just makes sense. And then you got Road, Compulse, Deck Dev, Oppression. So you play 2 copies of each of these. I do agree with not main decking them all, because if you go into those matchups, like, that they're just dead in. Like, you don't want to play all these dead cards in certain matchups. And then the extra deck, pretty standard. That's one of the changes I made, is I played the 3rd Armed Wing because I think it could come up. But yeah, pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Like I said, Vayu is one of those decks that is very, very, very solved. It feels like there's not a lot of room for innovation. Like, you can mess with your Raikou hamster charge ratios. You can maybe mess with the ratios of some of the traps. And then the side deck is kind of where you can get creative, but yeah, so this is a list. So I'm going to switch over and get into some replays, and I'm just going to talk over it and discuss kind of what I felt playing this deck this week. So starting off the discussion, I want to talk about first the pros and cons to playing Vayu from my perspective. These, again, are my opinion. Just because I disagree with certain things about the deck doesn't mean that other players will disagree with them. Again, this is one of the best decks in the format. I think it's second to Frogs of either Hero or Dream Frog variants. Pros and cons. Obviously, pros, the biggest thing is that this deck gets to play all of the power cards in Edison. You get to play Caius, Dark Arm, Chaos Sorcerer, Charge the Light Brigade, Royal Oppression, Return from a Different Dimension, Burial, Deck Devastation. Like, you can just play every blowout card that Edison has. Being able to bring Caius to your opponent, being able to set Hamster Raikou and kind of play through stuff like that. It is very, very overwhelming at times, just how many blowouts your opponent can draw into when you're playing against a Vayu player. And playing it, that is one thing I noticed, is like, you do play and you will see all of your like blowout cards like throughout matches. As far as cons go, the big one for me is the creativity with the deck. I personally pride myself on being good at innovating and trying new ideas and finding ways to make stuff work that is maybe a bit more obscure. As you could see with my nationals list for Amaryllis, playing the hero package and just trying new things. And I find like Vayu, it doesn't really have the room to innovate. Like, I feel like you would have to change too much of the list to really change up what this deck is supposed to be. So that's kind of a knock on it for me. Obviously, like with YCS Niagara being about a month away, actually today's the 13th, so it's exactly 1 month away. It just doesn't provide the time. Like, I don't have the time to like try and be creative and innovate what I bring to YCS Niagara, but this is a deck that I feel like I wouldn't be able to do that with anyways. The other con is that I find that while, yes, this deck is very explosive, you do see hands where you just don't do anything, and when you don't get to your Armed Wing plays, the deck feels very lackluster at times. Personally, I found myself losing a lot of games just because I milled a Sirocco and no Vayu, and I couldn't get to Vayu because I didn't see my warriors, and I was just holding like a hand of like Caius and MST and, you know, a Trap Dust Shoot, let's say, and like I just couldn't get myself to that point, and the Raikou mills weren't hitting, and it's just like, it feels bad when the deck does that. And then yeah, you get to play blowouts like Deck Dev and Oppression, but those cards, while blowouts, sometimes aren't great into every matchup. Obviously, like, they're really good into Frogs, which is the, in my opinion, best deck of the format. But yeah, sometimes like you queue up against a Blackwing player and it's just, that's 2 dead cards in your deck. Like, they don't really impact the duel as much as you would want them to. Obviously, they're not dead, like, can still hit stuff, but it just doesn't have the same impact as it does into, let's say, like Frogs. So as far as pros and cons go, that's kind of it. Playstyle, I find with this deck, it's very, very, very particular with when you make your pushes. Like, you can't mess up your push. Like, if you make a push with Armed Wings and you don't have a way to recur them yet with burial or return, and that push gets stopped, like you are screwed. Like there are very easy ways to lose the duel for yourself playing this deck, and it's the kind of playstyle that I personally can't get behind as much, coming from someone who plays Amaryllis, which is a lot more mid-rangey. Not that this deck is a mid-range, it's just like the way the resources are used in that list for Amaryllis compared to this. I just find that your pushes have to be game shots with this deck. And like, I'm not talking about like games where you have Brain Control, Caius, Dark Arm setup, and Burial. Like, I'm talking like those times when you have to make a push when you don't have those big blowout cards to back you, because you can't just hold and wait forever to draw into your power cards. Sometimes you can, but your opponents are going to pressure you if you aren't making plays. And this deck doesn't like build like a board of like a hard to out monster. It builds a board of Armed Wings, which, you know, can get run over by Caius, Titanial. They can't get over a Duplock with just an Armed Wing. Like, you need other cards. So it's like, with this deck, having to perfectly time your resources and your pushes feels not the best, just because like there are ways you can easily misread situations and lose yourself games with this. Whereas like a deck like, I would say, Amaryllis, your pushes are less resource involved. So when you make a push and you try and, like, let's say Miracle Fertilizer, summon a Titanium, make a push, and let's say it gets deprisoned, you usually have a follow-up, you have a plan B, a plan C. With this deck, it's like, it's a very linear playstyle. It's OTK your opponent with Armed Wings, and sometimes you draw blowout cards that sack your opponent. Stuff like a Dark Arm Dragon at the right time, or a Chaos Sorcerer to push for game, Oppression against a Frog deck, stuff like that. So outside of being able to sack your opponent with all the power cards, which I really like, I find that like the resource management with this deck can be a bit tricky at times, and sometimes like you have to make a push and it's the wrong time, and that can lose you duels. As far as the side deck goes, I do like the side deck, the way it's set up. Like, you can play a lot of really strong cards, stuff like Lightning Vortex, DD Crow fitting in it well, because you just have cards you want to discard, and DD Crow is just, you know, generically good. Stuff like being able to play Fossil Dyna, I really do appreciate that, because I think that Fossil Dyna is just fantastic and do all the top decks. It outs a Frog board. It's really good against Vayu, like in the mirror match, like being able to stop them from making Armed Wing pushes. That's pretty cool. Or if they have a board of synchros, like being able to set it and pop their whole board feels really strong. Obviously stuff like Dust Tornado, really good. Being able to play Light Mirror, because your only card's Raikou as far as lights go in your deck. That's really good. But yeah, it's just very standard. Like, a lot of what this deck comes down to is it's a very standard Edison format list. I feel like it plays what you would expect to see in a side deck, and the main deck is very solved. It plays all of like the big heavy hitters of Edison format. And again, it's a very strong deck. It's just, I don't know if this personally works for me as a list. Like, I feel like this is not the kind of deck that I would want to bring to YCS Niagara, because it's just, it doesn't feel good when I play it. Like, the way I want to play the game, it doesn't work for me. That being said, obviously one of the best decks. No shame playing this at an event. Like, you're giving yourself a chance to win an event if you play this, and the ability to sack your opponent will let you win games that you probably shouldn't, but that's the way Yu-Gi-Oh goes. I don't really have any closing remarks on this deck. I feel like, again, I'm kind of rambling at this point, but it's more so just, it's a very streamlined, linear playstyle deck that doesn't offer the creativity that I want from a deck. Like, for example, like a deck like Zombies is something that's on my radar once I kind of put Amaryllis to the side for a bit, because it's a deck that has a lot of different ways to build it. It's a deck that feels a bit underexplored. It's a deck that feels like it has the explosive power to win events, kind of like I see Amaryllis, and it just hasn't gotten over the hump yet to win that Ultimate Time Wizard. So yeah, when it comes to what I'm going to bring to YCS Niagara, so far, testing Vayu, I do not feel like this is the deck for me for this event. Again, very strong deck. I expect to see tons of it near the top tables of the event, hoping I'm there with them. It's just a playstyle that I don't think fully fits for me, with the way you have to perfectly time your resource pushes, and a lot of your wins come down to, oh, I drew Dark Arm, I drew Braincon Caius, I drew the deck Devi in the matchup where it's good. So yeah, I don't think it's something that I would consider for this event. I could see myself maybe down the line at future events playing it, but I feel like it's one of those decks that's been sided against hard, and it's just not for me. So next week, next episode, we are going to be tackling something that I do have a lot of interest in. And the reason I'm doing it next is because I think there's a real possibility I consider it. And that is going to be frogs. It might be a bit of a longer video because if I have the time, I'm going to do both Hero and Dream Frogs in the same episode. Just the way the weeks remaining before the event are and trying to time everything out how I plan it. I'm hoping to get them both in next week's episode, provided I get enough testing done with both. But Dream Frogs especially is something that very much piques my interest, partially because of the complexity when playing that deck. But yeah, thank you again for checking out this video. It was a bit rambly. I didn't get to play in as many like high-level matches or tournaments that I wanted to. It was a very busy week for me outside of Yu-Gi-Oh! So thank you to my buddies Steven and Brandon for letting me test against them and get some footage for this. I did not perform well, as you saw in the recordings, but it is what it is. And I just want to say thank you again for checking out this video. Stick around for next week when we tackle frogs. Bye.